Hello there and welcome back to another Heffy Doodle video. This is Cassie and I'm excited to be here with you. Let's take a look at some of the products that we're going to be using. We're going to be using this Eskimo Kisses stamp and die set. We're also going to be using the stitched Slopey Joes border die, and I did plan to use the Forest Builders die, but I don't actually end up using it. We are going to do some Copic coloring, and I'm going to start off using real time here. But I will eventually speed this up. But I wanted you to see what I was doing and just how fast I actually color, because clearly I don't color as fast as you would normally see in a video. My plan today was to do a Northern Lights scene, and with any Copic coloring scene, at least for me, I have noticed is that it looks like a hot mess before it looks like anything good, and this will be no exception. So as we're going along, you're going to look at it and go, wow, okay, well, but my advice to you is always to stick with it. It's the same sort of thing with galaxy backgrounds. If you've ever tried those always look like a nightmare before they look like something really beautiful. And I feel like this is sort of the same thing. Now, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but we're going to go ahead and just get going with the coloring. I started off with some colors that were in the blue-green family. I started off with BG53, and the darker shade that I used was BG18. These purples that I'm using, or violets, are V06, and the darker is V09. And then I'm going to move on to some blues, and then that's going to take care of our actual Northern Lights scene. I looked at several pictures online just using Pinterest. The Aurora Borealis, if I'm saying that correctly, but looking at the Northern Lights, and I saw so many beautiful pictures. So I kind of took melding in my own mind of what I thought it would look like, because I've never actually seen it. My husband has. He used to live up in Alaska for several years before moving back down to the lower 48, but I have no actual idea what they really look like. So I see them in pictures and it looks incredible, and so this is just my take on it. The blues that I used were B26 and B39, and all I'm really doing is just going back and forth using a lot of flicking motions, if you can tell. So this is a lot of flicking and and even at this point I'm still thinking this doesn't really look good at all. But I'm going to keep with it. In my mind, I keep telling myself, just stick with it. I know I want that dark blue to be at the bottom. So once again, I'm starting at the bottom and I'm flicking upwards. It's a easy motion to do when you just kind of, like you're making a check mark almost, just flicking up or flicking down. And that flicking at the end will cause you to have a much lighter stroke. So it blends out a little bit easier. So if you notice that even in the middle, I'll sometimes take my darker color and I'll flick up and then I'll flick down from that center so that it gives a lighter at the top and lighter at the bottom, if that makes any sense. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back over that B39 with the B26 to lighten that up just a little bit, using once again more flicking. And then we're going to go in with a little bit more of our V06, kind of overlapping some of those colors, because in some of the pictures that I saw, some of the color was very distinct, but some of it was not. And so this is just going to continue to be a constant back and forth until I end up being happy with the amount of saturation and color in there. And even with as much color as I have put on there, because I did so much flicking, it didn't absorb into the paper as much as you might have thought. Like, so if I had flipped over the paper, you would see some color bleed through, but not that much. And so I was really happy with how that was starting to look. Now, even at this point, I don't think it looks fantastic, but I will get to a point where I think, okay, we're going to have to stop here. And just like with a galaxy background, I feel like it doesn't really come together until you start adding like the snow, or in the galaxy case, stars. So I am going to eventually add some snow to this, but I'm going to keep working back and forth just using those colors. So here's where the snow is going to come in. I'm going to use some Picket Fences Distress Paint. I'm just going to put that onto a stamp block. I've got this into my makeshift splatter box. And I'm going to take a small paintbrush with a little bit of water on it, and I am going to just lightly flick that all over that background. This is where it will start to actually come together and look a little bit more like a scene. and I'm really starting to love the vibrant colors that I chose. I'll set that off to the side to dry, and now it's time to stamp out our images that we plan to use and do a little bit more Copic coloring. So I'm going to use the igloo and the little boy and the little girl, and later on I do a little bit more stamping, but at the time I wasn't 100% sure how I wanted this scene to play out. I have some Neenah Solar White cardstock into my Misty, and I'm stamping that down using Memento Tuxedo black ink. Both are alcohol marker friendly, so those are good for your Copics or any other alcohol markers that you might have. And now we are going to color those. I've chosen a different skin tone than I normally would choose. I chose E53 as my lighter shade, and as I have said before, I always like to go lightest to darkest. That's how I color best. I'm going to come in with a darker tone, which is just E55. Most of the time for these smaller images, it isn't necessary to have 3 color blends, even though you absolutely could. But if you are new to Copic coloring in any way, 2 colors would be just fine. For their hair, I'm using C7 because I want it to be black hair, but I don't want to come in with the Copic 100 because that is a straight black color. And I didn't want to do that because then that would take away from all the lines. And you know, when you look at someone's hair, there is actually variations in color just by the light that hits it. So I'll come in with the C10, and then I'll blend that out with the C7. For their coats, I am using W4 to start. That's my lightest color. And here is where I actually do bring in 3 color blends. And the reason I do that is because I wanted their boots to be a little bit darker, his boots and her boots to be just a little bit darker than the rest of their coat, the rest of their outfit. So I start with W4. That's my lightest tone. And then I'm going to come in with W6 and just start feathering that out just a little bit. Once again, I'm doing a flicking motion just because I find that with the flicking motion, it's a lot easier to blend that out than just sometimes the harsh line. But in some cases, you may want a harsh line, so you do what you're comfortable with. Then I will come back in, or now with the W8. And I'm being very sparing with my W8 because it is so dark. I mostly wanted it on the boots. And then I'll blend that out with the W6. And once again, I'll come in with the W4 to blend that out even more. Then I'm going to move on to using the W3 on the fluff of their coats. And I noticed I missed one of her little cuffs. And so then I'm just kind of doing dots because it's fluffy. So because it's fluffy, it's going to have some different kinds of shadowing and shading. For the igloo, I will use BG000. So it's very light blue. I just basically wanted it to have just a hint of blue. And I'm only doing that on those edges where I think the light might hit it. And then we are going to use the Y28 for their buttons. And then we'll get ready to die cut all of these out using the matching dies. I also went ahead and cut out the Stitch Slopey Joe border die. I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the bottom of that piece and the top of my Slopey Joe. The reason I did that is because I cut a very large slope. I wasn't sure how much I needed. So now I'm going to take this and put this inside of my guillotine cutter, and I'll just trim off all the excess. I want this card to be the entire front of an A2 size card, so that whole scene measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Here's where I decided I needed a little bit more stamping, so I am going to stamp the little pond part that's in the ice, the little cutout. I'll stamp that using the Memento Tuxedo black ink. I was taking a risk there since I'd already had the scene pretty much together, and I stamped out a tiny little fish. I colored those, and now I'm going to put the matching dies over the top. So the die that goes over the little ice hole is so cool because all it does is basically put a hole in the ice so that you can have something coming out. So then I'll run these through my die cutting machine, and then when they're all out, you can see how the little fish just fits right in that little hole, which is so cute. I'll use a little bit of glue to put him in place, and then I'm actually going to stick a stamp block down on top of him just to make sure he stays put because he is so tiny. All right, now we'll move on to stamping our sentiments. So I'm going to stamp my first sentiment using some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and this is the Sending Warm Hugs. I won't use all of that. I will end up cutting it apart. And I also want to stamp warm hugs, the bigger ones, in some Versamark ink on some Oreo Crunch cardstock. And then I'm going to cover that with some ultrafine white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. This is the Alabaster. And then I'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And then I'm going to trim those down, and I'm going to start adhering everything to the front. So I've cut apart, and all I have is the sending, and then I'm going to put down the warm hugs a little bit wonky. I want that to just be a little bit different. So I'm putting that down just using my Ranger Multimedia Matte. And I thought about using some foam tape, but I wanted everything to be pretty flush to this card. So I'm going to do the same thing with the little girl. And I'll also do the same thing with the little boy. They're all getting put flush to the card. And then now that they're down, I will grab the W3 Copic marker because I don't want that to look like they're just floating on the ice. They will have a little bit of shadow. So I'm just putting that under their feet. And now I'm going to adhere that to a heavyweight white card base. So I'm just using some Tombow Mono Multi Glue. And this will end up being a top folding A2 size card. I do want to do a little bit of stamping on the inside, so it says sending warm hugs, and this is going to say an Eskimo kisses. I didn't stamp anything else, I just left the sentiment. And then that is actually going to finish off our card. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Heffy Doodle if you haven't already done so. We always have plenty going on. And check out all the links down below to check out the store and check out the blog and everything else. And as always, guys, thank you so much for stopping in.